I can give you an example of that. It's kind of a funny example. You know, how many of you know what Tourette's syndrome is? Yeah, how many don't? Okay, well, Tourette's syndrome is a syndrome, it's a neurological syndrome that's characterized, oddly enough, by the propensity to curse. And so it's very strange, because you'd wonder how in the world a neurological condition can make you curse. It also, people with it also move, they have motor tics, and so they'll move in stereotyped fashions, and they really can't control that. So if they're concentrating on something, they can control their motor output, but if their concentration wanes, then they're often possessed by fairly complicated motor processes that sort of run independently of their will, as well as these vocalizations. Now you might think, how in the world could you have a neurological disorder that would make you curse, that would make you swear? It just doesn't make sense, in some sense, that your brain would be so fractionated in its specialization that, you know, that a neurological condition could emerge that was that specific. But here seems to be the answer. Most curse words are very, very short and kind of guttural. And they're usually 4 letters, as in the famous 4-letter word. And they're also usually expressed during conditions of high emotion. Now, it turns out that certain kinds of primates have distress calls. So, for example, perhaps there's a monkey troop, and one of its primary enemies are, you know, predatory birds that swoop down from the sky. And so the monkeys have evolved a cry that basically means, look out, there's an eagle in the sky that's going to eat you. And then once that cry is emitted by any of the group members, all of them immediately scatter and take defensive action. They hide. Or maybe they have this, it's another troop, and maybe they're preyed on by leopards or something like that, and they also have an alarm cry for the leopards, and that means, you know, hit the trees or do whatever you have to do to get away from the leopard. Well, it turns out that the linguistic centers that are in those monkeys that produce the alarm cries to predators are the same circuits that you use to curse. And if you have Tourette's syndrome, what happens is it's those old proto-linguistic circuits that you share with lower order primates that are disinhibited. And so you can see a good example there of a prototypic language structure, because monkeys are complicated enough to be able to say something like, holy shit, there's a jaguar, right? and it's usually the most nervous monkey in the pack who's always jittering around on hyper alert who manages to curse out a warning. And so anyways, you have this proto-linguistic, this underlying proto-linguistic capability that's at least part perceptual and conceptual. So we know, for example, that primates, and this is true for animals that are way less sophisticated than primates, are very good at social cognition. So they know to the individual exactly what strata the other members of their group occupy. You can imagine they're in a dominance hierarchy, right? There's the top primates and the bottom primates, and then there's strata of primates all the way up, just like there is in most animals. And primates are unbelievably good at knowing who's who. And they need to be, because if you mess with a high order primate, you know, one that's high up in the dominance hierarchy, and you're sort of lowly, you're going to get hurt. And it's better to be lowly and know your place, or at least this is how animals manage it, than it is to get hurt. Young males who are sort of climbing up the hierarchy will often take an awful lot of abuse trying to get to the peak. But most animals in a social troop are pretty much resigned to their locale, because it's safer to be there. And often the castes, so to speak, in the primate hierarchy are actually hereditary. So generation to generation, the same families, so to speak, occupy the same rungs. So one of the things we know about social cognition is that, and human cognition is that it involves social processing, and that it's also very much focused on status. There's some very funny studies of this sort of thing. I think one was done with macaques, if I remember correctly, where they'd show macaques photographs of other macaques from their troop, and those photographs were either of low status macaques or of high status sort of celebrity macaques, and the macaques would spend much longer time gazing at the high status celebrity macaques than like the low people, creatures, whatever have you, that they, you know, had nothing but contempt for. So you can think a lot of our pre-existing perceptual and conceptual categories are social, so we're always processing other creatures, humans for sure, but other living creatures as well, and we're also very concerned with who's doing what to who and when, and who's got the power, because it turns out that dominance hierarchy status, for example, is unbelievably important in determining, well, reproductive opportunities in particular, but also also general health and access to, prime access to resources, unbelievably important.